to another one of our online lectures here in History Through Film. We're going to finish up our Western Civilizations unit today by looking at our last civilization with the British. Again, the way we framed this is we want to look at the accomplishments that each civilization has provided us here in the modern world. We started with the Greeks, we looked at the Romans, we looked at the French, and now we're going to look at the British. So we've got one constructive response or one learning target that we're going to seek to answer here today. Our learning target says, summarize the aspects of Western civilization that were provided by the British. And we've got plenty of things that we're going to look at today as we go through this information. So let's take a kind of a inventory. What are we going to talk about? What contributions are we specifically going to look at? We're going to talk about contributions to government, contributions to industry, contributions to literature, contributions to architecture, contributions to education, and we'll finish by talking about a much bigger idea called imperialism, which we have looked at before specifically with the Japanese, but we're going to look at how imperialism, specifically British imperialism, has changed things on the planet. And certainly there's a lot of negative changes that come because of imperialism, and there are some positives as well, as the British try to create the largest empire on the planet. So those are really the main things we're going to look at today. So let's start with contributions to government. One of the biggest things that the British provide the modern world is common law. Common law originated in England in the Middle Ages, and it's basically a legal system that gives great weight to the principle that it is unfair to treat similar facts differently or on different occasions. And what that's trying to say is, it's trying to give all people equality under the law. Whether you're white, black, or rich, poor, or whatever, none of those things should matter. Everybody should be treated equally. So common law is a really big deal, and it certainly has trickled down into American politics because we broke away from the British and took a lot of their ideas with us. So this led to the development of jury trials and judges along with appellate courts. Those are things you really want because those are the things that keep you out of being wrongfully imprisoned or wrongfully executed, which sadly has happened a lot to many people in history. So this gives people their fair day and their right to be innocent until proven guilty. Today, 1/3 of the world's population, roughly 2.3 billion people, live in common law jurisdictions. What that means is, certainly because of British imperialism, and we'll make that connection later, but because the British have really extended their influence to a lot of different areas, a lot of people have adopted their ideas, including common law. And we here in the United States believe very heavily in it. We think it's a great system. We want our people to have these kind of rights. So this is definitely a positive contribution to the world, contributions to government from the British. Continuing on that idea, the British gave us Parliament. Parliament is the supreme legislative body in the United Kingdom. It's broken up into two houses, the House of Lords and the House of Commons, and that's worth mentioning because, of course, when we start our country here in the United States, we choose a similar path with Congress, with the House of Representatives and the Senate. But they do have a monarch. That's the big difference. They still have a queen. Today it's Queen Elizabeth II, and she's been queen since 1952. She doesn't have a lot of power. They have a prime minister, which is similar to our president. So the monarch is more of a figurehead than anything else. She is famous. It's a tradition, but she doesn't have a lot of power in terms of making laws or making policy within England or the UK. So many modern democracies base their government off of this model, including the US. Like I said, we have our Congress, which is very similar to British Parliament. Well, contributions to literature, we want to talk about several different authors, and not to diminish anything William Shakespeare has done, but most people know Shakespeare. Most of you have likely read at least Romeo and Juliet, perhaps Macbeth or Julius Caesar. Hamlet's very, very famous. Some say Hamlet's the greatest play ever written. So William Shakespeare provides the world with so many great stories, characters, and plots that are still read and studied and deciphered all over the world today. So huge contribution to literature. Another big contributor in the British realm to literature was Charles Dickens. Charles Dickens has written a lot of very famous books: Oliver Twist, David Copperfield, Tale of Two Cities, Great Expectations. Christmas Carol is probably his most famous, with The Ghost of Christmas Past, Present, and Future, with Ebenezer Scrooge. There's been lots of different movie versions of Scrooge that have been made right off of A Christmas Carol, so very, very famous. Tale of Two Cities was the kind of cornerstone. If you saw the film The Dark Knight Rises, when Christopher Nolan wrote that film with his brother, they used A Tale of Two Cities as sort of their backdrop to their plot. And even at the end of the film, and sorry if you haven't seen it, but at the end of the film when Commissioner Gordon is reading over Bruce Wayne's grave, he's actually reading right out of the book A Tale of Two Cities. So Charles Dickens is alive and well in many facets of pop culture, even if we didn't know it, like in that film. Another famous contributor to literature is Jane Austen. Jane Austen is very famous for her books Sense and Sensibility, Pride and Prejudice, also Mansfield Park, Emma, and Northanger Abbey. We get a little bit more to the fantasy realm with J.R.R. Tolkien. Of course, J.R.R. Tolkien is very, very famous for the Lord of the Rings books and the Hobbit book, which was turned into a trilogy of movies. So I think most people have either seen all of these films or heard of them. So not much more we need to say here that you don't already know, but certainly very, very famous British author. Talking about very famous British authors, especially in the modern era here, J.K. Rowling, one of the most famous female authors of our era because of the Harry Potter series, and she's made a lot of money off of that. When she started writing the Harry Potter series, she had nothing, and now she's a billionaire, and certainly gave the world a set of characters that will probably be loved and enjoyed for generations. So J.K. Rowling, very well known for the Harry Potter series. Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, if you're familiar with Sherlock Holmes, there's been lots of versions of Sherlock Holmes. You had the Robert Downey Jr. version, which there was 2 films. There is, I think on the BBC, there's a show called Sherlock that stars Benedict Cumberbatch. And then you can go all the way back to even early cinema. There was lots of versions of Sherlock Holmes. And after all, this is a history through film class, so it's worth mentioning those things. But Arthur Conan Doyle gave the world Sherlock Holmes and Watson, a very famous investigative duo from Great Britain. Of course, we can't forget James Bond. Our author Ian Fleming gave the world James Bond. There's been so many, 23 James Bond movies. And I'm sure they'll continue to make more. Many of those are based on books. Not all people are aware of that. You don't typically see people reading the Bond books, but many of those movies were based specifically off books. Many of them weren't as well. They were original scripts, but the character itself does come from the mind of Ian Fleming, who was an author. When it comes to contributions to industry, the British really pioneered the whole Industrial Revolution by coming up with the steam engine. The steam engine was invented by James Watt, who was actually from Scotland, but he built it in England in 1781. And Watt's 10-horsepower engines enabled a wide range of manufacturing machinery to be powered. This gave way to the factory system, which gives us mass production, which gives us new types of jobs and a whole new way of life, really. And so it all helped spur on the Industrial Revolution. Well, one of the biggest things that England is known for is education. And you see these 2 universities here, Oxford and Cambridge. So we're going to end this part of the lecture with contributions to education. So you have Oxford and Cambridge universities. I want to talk a little bit about each one of these and kind of give you an idea what they're all about. Oxford might be the oldest university in the English-speaking world. I say might be because there's no quantifiable data or evidence that says this one was the first, but we can trace back a lot of documentation, and we're reasonably certain Oxford was definitely one of not the first university in the English-speaking world. Now, it doesn't really matter that you're first. It really matters what you offer. So Oxford is not just one university. It's actually a whole bunch. It's made up of 38 constituent colleges. So if you say you're an Oxford-educated person, that might be from, Oxford School of Literature to the Oxford School of Science. I mean, there's all branches of those, and pretty much you can study just about anything there. So some of the best-minded people in the world went to Oxford, and it's said if you go to Oxford, it's like Harvard and Yale and Princeton here in the United States. Those are our best, some of our best schools. And Oxford, because of its tradition and its history, is kind of even seen as a step up from that. So if you really want to be part of the educated elite, you go to Oxford or Cambridge. Now, Cambridge might be the second oldest university in the English-speaking world. Again, we don't have perfect documentation. I say might because we're not totally sure, but it's a reasonably good guess. Cambridge is actually made up of 31 constituent colleges, and same thing. You can get an education in just about anything there, and it's not easy to get in. You don't just apply and go to Oxford or Cambridge. They really only accept the brightest of the bright. And both universities are considered to be the most elite in the world. Well, we're going to end there. We actually have one more piece that we need to look at. We need to dwell on British imperialism, because when we talk about contributions, yes, literature matters, education matters, industry matters, government matters. Those are things that many, many, many people around the world have been either exposed to or absolutely are mainstays in lots of different cultures. But that all happens because of British imperialism. So when we come back in part 2, we're going to talk about British imperialism, and we're going to look at how that brings conflict with the French over land to North America, which is going to result in the French and Indian War, which is going to lead us into one of our next films that we're going to watch. So we're going to talk about British imperialism when we come back. So go ahead and hit stop and cue up